In 1992, four 7-year-old black sisters, Tasha, Tanya, Tamika, and Tia Hayes, vanished from their grandmother's Georgia farmhouse without a trace. No forced entry, no witnesses, simply gone. For 21 years, their case lay cold, a haunting silence over what happened to the Hayes sisters. Then, after more than a decade of that silence, a stunning discovery shattered everything, proving some secrets refused to stay buried. A hiker near Briar Creek fell, not just into the earth, but into a buried bunker, and the first horrifying clue. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. 66-year-old Jean Hayes had been raising her 4 granddaughters for nearly 6 years, ever since their mother, Leah, took a full-time job as a hospital janitor in Augusta. It wasn't easy, but the girls, Tanya, Tamika, Tasha, and Tia, were the heartbeat of her quiet farmhouse in Swainsboro, Georgia. The girls were 7 years old. 4 of them. Fourlets, the doctors called them. Not twins. Not triplets. 4 identical little girls born minutes apart, each with her own attitude, but sharing the same round face, dark curls, and wide brown eyes. That morning, June 14th, 1992, Jean stepped out early to feed the chickens. She figured the girls were still asleep in their shared bedroom at the end of the hall. They'd been up late the night before watching old cartoons and playing with their birthday gifts. Their favorite ones, by far, were the matching white long-sleeve shirts their mother had custom printed. Each shirt had a bold red letter T printed on the chest. Tanya, Tamika, Tasha, and Tia. Their names. Their bond. Jean hadn't thought twice when they asked to wear the shirts to bed. When she came back inside, something felt off. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Usually by this hour, one of them would be arguing over the bathroom sink or sneaking extra jelly on toast. But the house was still. She called down the hallway. No answer. She pushed open their door. The beds were made. Every single one. Pillows fluffed. Blankets pulled tight. But no children. No giggles. No little shoes kicked under the bed. Jean's eyes darted to the dresser. The white shirts were gone. Her hands began to shake. She checked the closet, then the bathroom, then the front porch, the chicken coop, the backyard. Nothing. She tried to calm herself. Maybe they'd gone to the woods to pick wildflowers like they sometimes did. Maybe they were playing a prank. But Jean knew better. She picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. "This is Jean Hayes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My 4 granddaughters are gone." There was a pause, then a lazy reply. "Gone where, ma'am?" "If I knew that," Jean snapped, "I wouldn't be calling you." An hour passed before a cruiser arrived. Deputy Russell, a young white officer with a bored expression, climbed out. He scribbled in his notepad as Jean explained everything again. They didn't take their shoes. They didn't take their toys. Just those shirts. They were here when I went out, and when I came back, they were gone. Deputy Russell glanced around the girls' room, nodded slowly. "Kids that age, they like to wander. Especially in packs," he said with a shrug. "You sure you didn't leave a door open?" Jean stared at him. "You think I'd let 4 little girls wander out before breakfast?" He didn't answer. 2 hours later, Sheriff Buddy Eldred showed up. Bald, slow-moving, and clearly irritated by the drive, he didn't bother taking notes. "You said their mother's in Augusta?" he asked. "Yes. Working the overnight at County Hospital. She's been there all week." "Well, we'll need to speak to her." That was it. No urgency. No questions about potential witnesses. No mention of nearby roads, past complaints, strange vehicles. They said they'd do a walkthrough of the property. That began around 3 p.m. and ended before dusk. No dogs. No search grid. No press conference. No Amber Alert. Leah Hayes returned from Augusta that night after Jean's frantic call. She was 32 years old, strong-willed and quick to speak her mind, but nothing could prepare her for what she saw. She burst into the house barefoot, still in her uniform. When she saw the empty beds, she dropped to her knees and screamed. "Where are they?" she shouted. "Where the hell are my babies?" Jean held her tightly, whispering, "I looked everywhere. I swear to you, I don't understand. By morning, the official story from the sheriff's office was that the girls had either wandered off or possibly been picked up by someone known to them. Behind closed doors, they started pointing fingers at Jean. Maybe she was old and forgetful. Maybe she dozed off. Maybe she left a door unlocked. None of that made sense. There were no signs of a break-in. No broken glass. No tire tracks. Nothing stolen. Just 4 girls gone. By the 3rd day, volunteers arrived. Some church folk, a few neighbors. They walked the nearby woods. They shouted names. But when the police pulled back, so did most of the community. There were whispers. Some said Leah should have never left the girls with an old woman. Others said the girls' father, who no one had ever met, might have come back and taken them. None of it made sense. On the 7th day, the sheriff's department declared there was no credible evidence of a crime at this time. They never used the word kidnapped. Flyers went up around town. A photo taken on the girls' 7th birthday, just weeks earlier, showed them sitting side by side in their red-letter shirts, grinning with frosting on their cheeks. The photo faded over the years. But Jean never stopped searching. Every Sunday, she laid out 4 church dresses across their beds. On their birthdays, she set out 4 slices of pound cake. When someone asked why she still did it, she would open their closet and point to the row of tiny shoes. They didn't take him, she'd say. That's how I know it wasn't them who left. 18 years would pass. But what happened on June 14th, 1992 was never forgotten. Because 4 girls couldn't just vanish in a thin air. And because somewhere out there, someone knew what happened to the Hayes 4. By the time summer turned to fall in 1992, the town of Swainsboro had all but moved on. Local news stopped covering the case after 3 weeks. There were no more press conferences, no more patrols. The flyers stapled to utility poles had curled and peeled, rain-streaked and torn, until they were replaced with lost pet signs and yard sale ads. For the Hayes family, however, time didn't move. It fractured. Leah Hayes, mother of the missing girls, quit her job in Augusta within days of their disappearance. She couldn't focus, couldn't scrub another hospital floor knowing her daughters were out there, somewhere. Instead, she moved back into her mother's farmhouse. Grief made the small space feel crowded, like it was haunted by laughter that no longer existed. At night, Leah would walk through the house with the girls' baby blankets pressed to her chest, praying for dreams that would give her a clue. Some nights, she slept in their room, curled on the carpet between their empty beds. Jean Hayes, though older and stiff in her joints, became steel. She wrote letters to the governor, to black radio hosts, to a civil rights lawyer she'd heard speak once on public access TV. She mailed every letter with trembling hands and never heard back. She saved every one of them in a shoebox marked "Still Missing." The Swainsboro Police Department closed the Hayes case unofficially in November 1992. The report was only 6 pages long. The summary was just one sentence. Unable to locate missing juveniles. No sign of criminal activity. What they didn't mention in the file was what Sheriff Buddy Eldred told the local reverend after church one Sunday. 4 black girls raised by an old woman in the woods? Ain't hard to imagine they ran off. Or worse. The reverend said nothing. He just walked away. But word got back to Jean. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply took down the missing poster from her own front porch and replaced it with a hand-painted sign that read, "They didn't run. You did." Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Jean and Leah marked each one with quiet rituals. They placed candles at the edge of the woods. Leah kept the birthday photo from 1992 in her wallet, creased, fading, nearly torn in 2. In 1998, Leah tried to push the police again, demanding they reopen the file, citing new articles about child trafficking and rural kidnappings. She was told the case was too cold to reheat. A junior detective suggested she get in touch with America's Most Wanted. Leah did. They never aired it. That same year, Jean began forgetting things. First it was names, then dates. Eventually, whole days vanished from her memory. By 2001, she could no longer remember the girls' voices clearly. One night, she sat on the porch and whispered to Leah, "I keep thinking I hear them laughing, like they're hiding behind the trees, just out of sight." Leah didn't respond. She just reached over and held her mother's hand. In June of 2003, On the anniversary of their disappearance, Leah lit 4 candles in the backyard. She didn't say their names aloud. She was too tired, too hollow. Grief wasn't sharp anymore. It was sediment. Heavy, permanent. That summer, something shifted. A retired reporter named Glenn Rowley visited Swainsboro for a funeral and struck up a conversation with Leah at the gas station. He'd covered missing persons cases in Alabama and Tennessee in the early 90s, and when she told him her story, he listened with unexpected focus. "You said they all wore matching shirts with red letters?" he asked. "Yes. T-shirts. Long sleeve. Each had a red T printed on the front." Rowley jotted it down in a notebook. A week later, he called her from a payphone outside a Waffle House. "You ever hear of Tate's Bluff?" Leah hadn't. He told her it was a stretch of forest about 15 miles east, technically part of Emmanuel County, but rarely patrolled. There'd been rumors back in the day. Strange disappearances. An old hunting camp. Nothing concrete. He offered to help get eyes back on the case, but Leah didn't trust promises. She thanked him and hung up, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. That weekend, she drove out to Tate's Bluff alone. The road ended half a mile from the woods, and the path beyond was barely a trail. Just mud, moss, and wild vines. She walked for an hour. No direction, no goal. Just moving like she was chasing a feeling. She didn't find anything, but someone else would, just 3 weeks later. A pair of hikers, out for a photo trek, ventured off the beaten path near the edge of Tate's Bluff. A sudden groan of earth beneath them gave way to a narrow sinkhole. One man fell 5 feet before landing hard on a slanted concrete surface. They thought it was a septic tank at first. Then they saw the rusted steel door. Authorities were called, and within hours, the area was sealed off. Emmanuel County officials reported the discovery of an underground bunker-like structure, roughly 12 feet by 9 feet in size. The space was dark, musty, and partially collapsed on one side. There was no light source, no power, no windows. Just a drain in the center of the floor. Inside, among debris and tree roots, they found 4 small white shirts. Each had a bold red T on the chest. Folded, arranged in a square, all facing inward. The fabric was heavily stained, mildewed, weather-aged, and partly rotted, but the letters were still visible. Printed ink. Red, bright as blood. Leah wasn't informed right away. In fact, it took nearly 2 days for anyone to connect the find to the Hayes 4. When it finally showed her a photograph, she collapsed to the floor, not because of the shirts, but because she recognized the way they'd been folded. That's how Jean had folded their clothes every Saturday before church. It was no accident. It was a message. And after 11 years of silence, the case of Tanya, Tamika, Tasha, and Tia Hayes was reopened. But it wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. The photograph of the shirts, faded white cotton, curled red letters, was all over the local news by morning. But it didn't feel like progress to Leah Hayes. It felt like a grave being reopened with a spoon. The investigation was handed to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation after public pressure mounted. People who hadn't thought about the Hayes girls in years were suddenly full of opinions. Social media didn't exist back in 1992, but now every blog and message board in the state lit up with theories. Some blamed Jean Hayes outright, calling her negligent for leaving 4 children alone. Others accused the police of a cover-up, convinced the shirts had been planted. Leah ignored it all. She didn't need more opinions. She needed answers. Or at the very least, someone willing to look without assuming. That person turned out to be Special Agent Corinne Darby, 44 years old, a former forensic analyst turned field investigator. She had a reputation for handling rural cold cases with quiet aggression. No press conferences, no dramatics, just methodical obsession. Darby met Leah in person 1 week after the sinkhole discovery. "I'm not here to make promises," she said, her tone calm but pointed. "But I want you to know this isn't going in a drawer." Leah just nodded, her hands locked in her lap. "You think they died in there?" she asked quietly. Darby didn't answer. Not then. What Darby did was request access to the old case files from 1992. She reviewed the original sheriff's report, the 2 short interviews conducted with Jean and Leah, and a single-page summary that stated there was no sign of abduction. Darby flipped that page over, then again. Nothing. No photos. No footprints. No timeline reconstruction. No evidence logs. It was clear the girls were treated as runaways. Even after Jean begged for door-to-door searches. Even after Leah submitted their school records, church attendance, and birthday photos to prove how settled and structured they were. Even after Tanya's teacher came forward back then and said Tanya cried on the last day of school and clung to her arm, saying she didn't want summer to start. No one cared. But Darby did. She returned to the farmhouse and asked Leah to walk her through the day one more time. Leah sat her down at the kitchen table. The house hadn't changed. The couch had the same coverlet. The girl's bedroom had been left untouched, still painted pale blue, still lined with storybooks and matching twin beds. She told her what she remembered. That Jean had gone out early to feed the chickens. That the girls were awake before she left, already dressed or getting dressed. That they wore the white long-sleeve shirts with the red tees because they were going to practice a 4-part gospel performance for Sunday school, and they liked to dress alike for it. That Jean came back inside just before 8 a.m. to start making breakfast and found the house silent. The beds were made. The back door was unlocked, and the girls were gone. There were no screams, no signs of forced entry, no blood, no overturned chairs. Just gone. Darby asked about neighbors. The closest was a man named Alvin Delroy, who lived a quarter-mile away and had passed away in 1999. His house was now vacant. Darby filed for a warrant to search the Delroy property, citing proximity and lack of prior investigation. The GBI crime scene team joined her, sweeping the old house, the well and back, and the storm shelter near the fence line. They found nothing. But while searching the wooded path between the Delroy and Hayes houses, they found a discarded, rusted wagon under a sheet of pine needles and vines. It had no handle. Its wheels were cracked, but it had a faint stain along the inside wall. A dark patch, old but unmistakable. They took a soil sample and bagged the wagon. Darby didn't tell Leah. Not yet. Meanwhile, the sinkhole bunker was being treated like an archaeological site. The interior had collapsed on one side, but the shirts had been shielded by debris and a plastic storage lid that had formed a makeshift roof. Forensic analysts noted that the way the shirts were folded in position showed intentional care, not random dumping. There were also 4 small plastic bowls inside the bunker. Each was placed at the edge of the space against the wall. Each was facing inward. The bowls had no fingerprints, no visible residue, and no cracks. But their presence, like the shirts, felt pointed, like someone had created a setting. Darby reviewed the photos late into the night, printing each one and placing it on a corkboard in her temporary office at the Emmanuel County substation. She saw what no one else wanted to say. This wasn't just abandonment. It was ritual, and it likely wasn't the first time. Back at the farmhouse, Jean had grown weaker. Her memory had begun skipping like a scratched record. Sometimes she would refer to the girls in present tense, asking if they were still out in the backyard playing hopscotch. Other times, she would tell Leah she saw them standing at the edge of the woods again, lined up like ducklings holding hands. Leah no longer corrected her. There was no point. At night, Leah began keeping her phone under her pillow. She didn't know what she was hoping for. A call, a break, a dream. She didn't care what form it came in, just something. But what came next wasn't hope. It was worse. A second sinkhole opened just a mile from the first, this one smaller, near an abandoned grain silo. Inside was a sealed, rusted box the size of a bread pan. When investigators opened it, they found 4 cloth hairbands. Pink, all sun-bleached, with rust-colored staining on one side. They were wrapped around 4 human baby teeth. Labeled, 1 tooth per band. The labels were simple masking tape strips. On them were names written in faded black ink. Tasha, Tanya, Tia, Tamika. The handwriting was tight, precise, as if someone had taken their time. Leah didn't speak for hours after being told. When she did, she asked a single question. Why would someone do this? Agent Darby didn't answer, because deep down, she already knew. This wasn't about killing. This was about keeping. It was the photo of the box that finally broke Jean. Not the shirts, not the hairbands. The box. When Leah showed her mother the printed image, 4 cloth bands for teeth, The names. Jean stared at it for a long time without blinking. Then she turned her face to the window and whispered. They had tiny gaps when they smiled. Leah didn't ask what she meant. She knew. She remembered all 4 girls grinning through the front yard sprinkler that summer, with those same missing teeth. She remembered how they all giggled and said it made them talk like chipmunks. Now the teeth were labeled like exhibits. Agent Darby had the forensic team analyze everything. The box, the cloth bands, even the ink on the masking tape. It was a strange combination, faded ink, but nearly preserved adhesive. The bands had weathering from dampness, but no insect marks, no signs of rodent chewing. All of it pointed to one thing. The box had not been underground the whole time. Someone had buried it later. That shifted everything. If the sinkhole bunker dated back to 1992, when the girls first vanished, then the shirt preservation made sense. But this second discovery, a mile away, suggested ongoing possession. Someone had kept those items in relatively clean conditions, possibly even indoors, for years. The GBI called in a criminal behavioral analyst. Her profile was chilling. This individual is deliberate, she said. Organized. Fixated. Likely male. Possibly someone who lived in proximity to the family in 1992. The use of symmetry, labeling, and care indicates not just obsession, but pride. The behavioral team gave the unknown subject a temporary code name, the Keeper. The media ran with it. Headlines read, "The Keeper still haunts Georgetown. Chilling clues found in Hayes' 4 case." But Leah refused to give the man that power. She wouldn't call him anything at all. Meanwhile, Agent Darby made a quiet discovery of her own. Digging into old tax records and emergency calls from the early 90s, she found something strange. In August of 1991, 11 months before the girls vanished, a small trailer home just 4 lots down from Jean Hayes' property burned in a mysterious electrical fire. The occupant was a white man in his 30s, never charged, but listed in the local fire marshal's report as odd, socially isolated, frequently complained about noise from children. His name was Nathan Clyburn. Clyburn had no criminal record, no marriage, no children, but he did own a tool rental business just off Route 56. And he disappeared from Swainsboro 2 weeks after the Hayes girls vanished. Darby tracked him to a remote corner of South Carolina, where he'd been living under his real name, quietly and legally, for the last 2 decades. He'd never left the country, never changed his identity, but he had bought a rural property near a large wooded preserve. Darby made the drive alone. The house was small, with peeling paint and boarded windows. She noticed immediately that no children's toys or decorations were visible. No signs of family. She knocked. The man who answered looked to be in his late 50s. Thin, dry skin, yellowed eyes. He didn't flinch at the badge. "I remember them," he said before she could speak. "The 4 girls. I used to hear them laughing when I lived back there. They were loud." Darby didn't say anything. Clyburn blinked slowly. "Tragic case," he muttered. "The kind that sticks with a town." Darby asked if he'd ever been interviewed during the original investigation. He shook his head. "No one ever asked," he said. She asked if he'd ever spoken to Jean or Leah Hayes. He smiled faintly. "No, I stayed out of people's business." Darby requested a search of the property. He refused. Later that day, she filed an emergency warrant. But before she could return with the team, the house caught fire. Just like in 1991. This time, Clyburn was found unconscious in the back room, overcome by smoke but alive. He was hospitalized with burns on his arms and smoke inhalation. The GBI executed the search during his hospital stay. Inside the house, they found a locked freezer. It contained only paper. Dozens of sheets, old newspaper clippings, children's drawings, and photocopies of local flyers from the 90s. Most were water damaged, but one remained dry and pristine. A coloring page, torn from a Sunday school workbook. The title read, "Jesus Loves the Little Children." Underneath were 4 sets of scribbled crayon names. Tanya, Tamika, Tasha, Tia. Agent Darby stared at it for several minutes. Then she stepped outside and threw up in the grass. They still didn't have physical evidence tying Clyburn to the shirts or the teeth. No DNA, no fingerprints. No confession. But Leah didn't care about a trial anymore. She just wanted it to stop. That night, she brought the coloring page home to Jean. She expected her mother to cry. But Jean didn't. Instead, she whispered something strange. He watched them through the trees. Leah turned to her, confused. What do you mean, Mama? Jean was staring past her, out the kitchen window, as if the forest beyond the backyard had never changed. Back then, she said, I used to see someone standing just inside the woods. Thought I was imagining it. Thought maybe it was my eyes. Why didn't you say anything? Jean didn't answer. She just stared into the dark. That night, Leah locked every door in the house. But the silence felt louder than ever. Because in her bones, she knew, whoever he was, he didn't just watch. He waited. By morning, word of the fire had spread across Swainsboro. Everyone had an opinion. He burned the place down to hide something. No, he was just a hermit. Those types always seem strange. He must have done it. What else makes sense? In a town still shaken by the discovery in the bunker, Nathan Clyburn had become a silent figure of blame. But inside the GBI's cold case unit, Agent Darby knew better. She had nothing solid. Not yet. Clyburn remained hospitalized under watch. He refused to speak after the fire. He ate, slept, but didn't respond to any questions. A psychologist called it selective mutism under stress. Darby called it what it was, calculated silence. Meanwhile, the forensic team continued combing through the remains of the house. And that's when they found it. Behind a false panel in the crawl space, a rusted footlocker. Inside, rolled newspaper bundles, dozens of old cassette tapes with handwritten dates, and a folded piece of fabric. It was white, cotton, and stitched across the front was a faded red letter. T. Darby froze. She had seen this before. The same kind of shirt the Hayes girls were last seen wearing. The same red tee that their grandmother Jean insisted she'd ironed onto each long-sleeved choir shirt before bedtime. Only this one had burn marks. Not from the house fire. Older. This shirt had been partially burned and then folded, like someone had tried to destroy it but couldn't bring themselves to finish. There were no bloodstains, no hair, nothing for DNA, but it was enough. The GBI added arson to the investigation. Arson to destroy potential evidence in a child abduction case. Darby hoped it would buy time. She visited Clyburn again, brought the shirt. He didn't even blink. You know what this is, she said. You've been keeping pieces of them. What? Silence. Why did you leave it half-burned? Why keep it all? His eyes moved to the window. Darby leaned closer. You watched them through the trees. You wrote their names. You kept their teeth. What kind of man does that? Clyburn's voice was barely audible. I don't know what you're talking about. But Darby saw it. That brief twitch in his cheek. The twitch people have when they're caught between shame and pleasure. That night, Darby met with Leah Hayes of the county office. They sat in a small conference room with old linoleum floors and flickering lights. Leah didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the photo of the shirt on the table. My girls, they used to line up in the hallway after breakfast. Jean would hand out the shirts, and they'd all shout who got the cleanest one. It was like a game. She touched the edge of the photo. They were supposed to grow up, have kids of their own. You know, Darby nodded. I know. That weekend, the community gathered for what the mayor called a memorial march. 1,400 people. They lit candles and walked the road that stretched from the Hayes property to Tate's Bluff, where the sinkhole had exposed the bunker. Along the way, they tied new red ribbons to every mailbox. But Leah didn't attend. She was at home, going through Jean's old photo boxes, looking for something. She didn't know what. Maybe proof. Maybe comfort. Instead, she found something strange. An old Polaroid tucked behind a church newsletter from 1992. It showed the four girls in their long-sleeved white shirts, standing in front of Jean's porch. But in the far left corner of the photo, half in frame, stood a man. Barely visible. Face turned. Just an elbow. A watch. A sliver of pale cheek. But Leah knew that watch. She'd seen it in the evidence photos. In the fire debris at Clyburn's house. It was on the dresser. Stainless steel. Cheap brand. Darby had missed it. Leah called her immediately. He was there, she said. At our house. That day. Before they vanished. Darby scanned the photo. She filed for new subpoenas. checked county gas bills, water usage, everything she could find. And there was again a curious entry. In June 1992, someone had called the fire marshal to report a chemical smell in the woods behind Tate's Bluff, just 4 days after the girls disappeared. No follow-up, no visit, just a note in a dusty ledger. Caller refused to leave name. Darby drove out there herself. This time, she brought ground-penetrating radar. The team scanned the area behind the sinkhole, where the vegetation grew in strange patterns. And 11 feet underground, they found something. Another chamber, unfinished, like the bunker was part of something bigger. The soil was dry and undisturbed. No scent, no remains, but the concrete slab showed drag marks. Darby stared at the pattern, then at the tree line. Something didn't sit right. Who builds 2 chambers and only uses 1? The next morning, before she could return to the site, Clyburn was found unconscious in his hospital bed. Pill overdose. They saved him, but just barely. He was placed on psychiatric watch. And still, he said nothing. Leah sat outside the hospital that night in her car, headlights off, gripping the steering wheel. She didn't want him to die. Not before she knew. Not before he admitted what he did to her daughters. But some part of her also feared the truth. Because deep in her heart, she suspected it might be worse than anything she could imagine. And if he did talk, what if he told her the girls had been alive longer than she thought? What if they had cried out, waiting for her? She stayed in that car for 2 hours. Then she drove home, silent, and the forest on both sides of the road felt too close, too still, like it was listening. The church was nearly empty. Just one light left burning above the altar, and 4 candles on the front row, each flame trembling like a breath too fragile to hold. The choir loft was covered in white cloth. Dust gathered on the edges. No music played. Leah Monroe sat alone, wrapped in a wool shawl she didn't remember bringing. Her hands trembled as she folded a program in her lap over and over, creasing it until the paper was soft as linen. No one else had come. No service had been scheduled. No announcement made. She just needed to be here. New Light Chapel was where her daughters had sung, where they'd worn their long-sleeved white shirts every Sunday, where the letter T, stitched bold and red across the chest, had made them feel important. The Hayes Four, they used to call them, not to mock, but with wonder. For girls so alike they seemed born of the same heartbeat. Tasha, Tanya, Tamika, Tia. She whispered their names into the silence. It had been 21 years. And still, she waited for the door to open. Leah's mind wandered to the last morning she'd heard their voices. They were in the kitchen with her mother, Jean Hayes, begging for extra syrup. Tasha had spilled juice on her shirt, and Jean scolded her gently before reaching for the iron again. "You're not going out wrinkled," Jean said. "Not my girls." That shirt, the one with the fresh press line and damp collar, was one of the 4 found in the bunker. Still clean, still folded, still holding a warmth that felt unnatural after so much time. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation released a statement earlier that week. No human remains found. No conclusive forensic evidence. Investigation remains open. But what could they really say? They failed these girls 21 years ago. Failed their grandmother. Failed their mother. And no amount of radar imaging or cadaver dogs could erase that truth. Jean Hayes had been accused, investigated, gossiped about for years, until the weight of public suspicion broke her. She died in 2004. Alone. Leah never forgave the town for it. She pressed her hand to the top of her chest, to the pendant she never took off. It held 4 tiny pearls, one for each daughter. A gift from Jean on what would have been their 10th birthday. Outside the church, the wind picked up. A door clanged somewhere in the back, then went still. The candles on the front row flickered violently, then calmed. Leah didn't move. She had nothing left to fear. Grief had stripped everything else away. The bunker where the shirts were found had already been sealed off. Forensics came and went. Reporters swarmed the woods, eager to capture horror and mystery. But they never showed the real cost. Not the years Leah spent calling police stations, not the nights she screamed into pillows so the neighbors wouldn't hear, not the decades of birthdays missed. She walked to the altar, one by one. She touched each candle with 2 fingers. She didn't say a prayer. She didn't believe in miracles anymore. She just said their names again, like an anchor against forgetting. Tasha, Tanya, Tamika, Tia. At the back of the church, a maintenance light buzzed to life. It startled her, not because of the sound, but because it reminded her of a time when they used to giggle about the way it flickered. Tia called it the ghost light. She'd pretend it was blinking in Morse code and would decode secret messages, usually about snack time. Leah smiled faintly, then broke. She dropped to the front pew, shoulders hunched, head bowed. The cries came in waves. No words, just sound, raw and animal. The kind of grief the body remembers, even when the mind can't find language for it anymore. She clutched the pendant and rocked. Minutes passed, maybe more. When the door finally opened, it was a custodian. He froze. She didn't turn. He stepped quietly, recognizing her, but saying nothing. He knelt and relit one of the candles that had gone out. Then he left. Leah stayed seated. The church remained dim, but not dark. In front of her, the four flames flickered again. And for just a moment, maybe in her grief, maybe not, she imagined them dancing. Like four little girls, hands clasped, twirling in long-sleeved white shirts and Sunday shoes. Still laughing. Still together. Still hers. She didn't believe they were coming home. But they would not be forgotten. She would make sure of it, even if it took the rest of her life. And in the silence that followed, Leah Monroe wept. Not because she still hoped, but because hope had finally gone quiet. And all that was left was love.